I'm very happy to be with Rene Carayol, who is something of a leadership guru, formidable businessman, sat on the board of British companies, US companies, non-executive director of the Inland Revenue, and was awarded an MBE for outstanding services to business. Rene was the youngest person to sit on the board of a UK company, IPC, at 28, and also the first IT director. I'm most aware that Rene has a reputation for asking the difficult questions, shakes things up, and brazenly, I think, champions leadership and people in business and why that's important. You've said many times, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, it's all a people business. It's all about the people. So with that huge wealth of experience and exposure you have to different cultures, different businesses, different industries, a whole wealth of different experiences, what was the catalyst that actually was that spark, if you like, that took you on this journey, which is so passionately championing people in businesses, true leadership, great leadership? Where did that start?
Do you know, it's interesting, there are two bits, and very generous comments, Kate. I was blushing there. It's a good job people couldn't see me blush. But I think the first bit is being son of immigrants. You know, and I think if I look back to when my parents came to the UK in the early 60s, and it was in London. London was a very, very different place then. If we think about London of the 2012 Olympics to London when my parents came in the 60s, it's unrecognisable. And I think at that time, especially coming from a former British colony, where subservience was part of the deal, and not only thinking you might be secondary, but believing you are secondary was part of the deal. And I saw my parents sacrifice, because coming from West Africa, I was born in Gambia. So when
were diplomats then?
my dad was the High Commissioner for Gambia at the time, and they sacrificed everything because their real big plan was get the kids educated, because the schooling in Gambia wasn't brilliant. We had primary education, hardly any secondary, and certainly no tertiary education. And they were giving up everything they had, and they were relatively middle class in Gambia. But coming here, I think the culture shock of even being a diplomat but being an immigrant meant living in the worst housing, going to the worst schools, and not having a culture of education. Not having that. My parents didn't go to university, so they didn't know how to navigate the system. But I think where I was quite lucky, I could see that Mum had never worked in life and hadn't intended to work. She was doing 3 jobs and 2 of them was a cleaning job. That's humbling. So I had a bit of hunger. In fact, I had massive hunger, ravenously so, really driven, and learnt from an early age, if you don't back yourself, no one else is going to back you. If you don't believe in yourself, it's impossible for anyone else to believe in you. You know the old adage goes throughout that you're only as good as your teacher's expectation of you. That came home to me in the very, very early days. And the bit I'll never forget was, again, first day of school. And it's the first time you're really asked to conform. Up until school, you don't have to conform. You're part of the family. Do what you want. It's okay. Everything's cool. But it's uniform. It's arriving at a particular time. It's fitting in. It's all those things. And I was dead excited, despite older sister's blazer and, you know, shorts that Mum made, etc., etc., etc. And as I'm leaving the door, Mum shouts out, and I think most immigrant mothers said the same thing. She said, remember, you be twice as good as that white boy sitting next to you. I didn't know what it meant. It was just words. I just wanted to get to school. I wanted to be part of school. Get to school, get into the classroom, fantastic time. And it was, to me, it was the day of awakening, the day I was part of something special. Then when the teacher comes in, I remember what Mum said, you be twice as good as that white boy sitting next to you. I look around the classroom, there are no white boys in the classroom. And it was the first day that I realised that well-intentioned mother was in danger of giving me an inferiority complex, and realised that it wasn't about race, it's about me. How far do I want to go? And if you're really that determined, of course there are hurdles and barriers in the way. If you're really that determined, I found, especially in London, you could be who you wanted to be. And that's never left me. I think growing up, being much older, much more mature, those early lessons stuck with me. Yeah. And if I had a challenge for leadership in the UK today, we're so process driven. We're so factored by what we did last year. We're so informed by our history that sometimes we're not brilliant at embracing new things. And I still would see our challenge of today is, and it's the illiterate of the 21st century won't be those who can't read and write. It's those who can't learn, unlearn, relearn. Especially today. And I've been lucky enough that what I've done in the past doesn't govern what I'm trying to do in the future. That's a little bit crazy, and it means you upset a few people, but most of the time, if you can see some things that others can't, and you can articulate a way how they can get there, you're probably going to succeed.
I think you encourage and instinctively see people that maybe have got a massive amount of fear, but have the desire or the great intention or the knowledge to actually do something different. But I think often it takes someone.
I think you're right. I think you're right, Kate. I think leadership isn't management. Yeah, it's totally different. And in many respects, I would say that leadership is the art of achieving more than the science of management says is possible. That's why we obsess about it. It's doing the things that other people said couldn't be done. That's the bit that gets really exciting.
You can't put it in a spreadsheet, you can't put it in a box.
You've got it, and it's ordinary people achieving extraordinary results. And if we've ever needed extraordinary leadership, it's in these extraordinary times. We need it. But the challenge is we can train management, we can only develop leadership. It's different. So you can train anyone to do management. One size fits everyone. This is the way you do it. We can measure it, we can calibrate it, and there's only one way to do it. Leadership starts with the individual, the awakening and the awareness of the individual. And it's a bit like education. The minute you've decided to become a leader, no one can take it away from you. And it's not rocket science, it's not complex, it's about you. And sometimes it's as simple.
I think people think it's complex, though.
Yes, they
and
do.
People are fearful of it.
Of course.
And I think what you do very cleverly is you stir people up to see it as it is. And as you say, it is.
I'm just not clever enough to explain the clever stuff, so I keep it very, very simple. But do you know, the fabulous thing about it is if we look at the best leaders of modern times, they are everyday people. And sometimes it's the teacher in the toughest comprehensive. It's the single mother trying to navigate through, can't really afford to get through the day. It's the cashier in the bank that nobody loves anymore. It's the till operator in the huge supermarket that's lost its way. Now, for me, it's all about understanding the 2 or 3 things I do brilliantly. If management is all about finding the 2 or 3 things I do badly and focusing on it, I think leadership is about finding 2 or 3 things I do brilliantly and capitalising upon it. And for everyone, their leadership code is totally different. And your strengths, my strengths, can be totally different. That's okay. And I've been privileged enough to work with some of the best leaders of our era, and I mean the really best. And the Queen said I shouldn't name drop, so I won't. But from Mikhail Gorbachev to Bill Clinton to Richard Branson, I've been lucky to work with them. The only reason I mention them is that I don't know any of them who are flawless. I don't know any of them who are all-rounders. But what I do know is they're good or 2 or 3 things only, and they've honed them to near Olympian standard. And what the trick they pull, which I think is fantastic, they've realised in today's difficult, ambiguous, complex and unpredictable times, no one person can do it on their own. The markets that measure us, no matter what we do, are too fast-moving and too unforgiving. So the smart leader, what they do, say, I'm good at 2 or 3 things, I'm rubbish at these 7 or 8 things, but my team will be good at those 7 or 8 things, so we'll balance ourselves out.
You speak very compellingly about Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York, who was mayor at the time of 9/11. He states 3 leadership qualities as being loving people, being optimistic, and being utterly, absolutely clear on what your vision is. What are your 3 leadership absolutes?
I think if I go back to the beginnings of my career, far too many years ago, when we had the performance appraisal did a number of things, but what it was absolutely fixated on, especially in Western developed societies, especially Europeans, so Britain probably at the forefront, was in the 80s, when I started out work, it used to be what are your weaknesses in those blunt, blood-curdling days. In the 90s, it moved to, what are your areas for improvement? Nowadays, it's your areas for development. But it's a fixation with what you're not so good at. And your personal development plan for the next year was all about doing the tasks that would help you be good at the things you're so rubbish at.
Or be mediocre at it, rather than...
If you're lucky.
Yeah.
But you know, I had this virtuous circle that the things I tend to be really good at, I tend to really enjoy. The things I tend to really enjoy, I tend to be really good at. Passion. You know, it's quite simple. I remember my very first performance appraisal when I worked at Marks and Spencer's to the very last one I had before I left corporate life at IPC. The three things I was good at were identical from the day one to when I left. And it was pretty good at the big picture, could communicate it a bit, and was really passionate about it. Whatever it was, I could do those three things. And they stayed consistent. So after a while, they become undeniable. You know, you can't argue with it anymore when everybody says, they're the three things that you... And I suppose the challenge for me then was, could I find myself a role, a career, a place in life where I could do the big picture, can communicate it a bit, and could be really passionate about it. And I'm lucky that the things I do now, every day calls for three things. And it's those three things. And what I advise everyone who's opening the leadership manual for the first time, the first question you want to ask yourself is, what am I great at? Not, what are the 28,000 things I'm not so good at? But what are the 3 or 4 things I am really great at? I think the first step, number one, if you really want to know your leadership code, what do I stand for? What am I great at? What will I be famous for? Why should everyone be led by me? The answers are all the same thing. It's those 2 or 3 things I'm really good at. But because we're taught to be self-effacing and self-deprecating, the last thing we'll say is, oh, and by the way, I'm really good at these 3 things. Go and ask a loved one. Go and ask someone you've got unconditional love with. A partner, a child, a mother, a father, a brother, a sister. They won't use the business words, but...
Yeah,
and don't argue, just listen. Just listen. Yeah. And then go away and digest it. And if you ask 2 or 3 people, you'll get a consensus that might start to inform you. And it's...
Is that what you did?
Yeah, my expensive daughter gives me the feedback that, you know, everyone deserves feedback, but not this regular. So I get this really regular feedback from my daughter, and I remember saying to her, what do you think I'm good at? And she said, how long have I got? She said, I've got to think this through, Dad. I've got to find one thing. And then she said, generous. Dad, you're generous. I was surprised. And over a few days, and she dragged it out and bribed me to give her more money, to give her more of the detail. What came out was generous with my time. And that's the bit she loved. Dad, you're there to listen. Dad, when I need you around, you're there. And I thought about it, and I thought, I'm curious about people, which brings the same dynamic. But I had to take that feedback and think, I'm really interested in people. I'm not interested in processes, and I'm interested in what makes people tick. How far can they go? That's what she was really saying to me. Yeah. But I think on occasion, sometimes, because we'll listen to someone who's not in business, it's easy to dismiss. But you know, if you're starting your leadership journey, the 4 most powerful words you can use on a regular basis, what do you think?
Recently, in the Sunday Times, when you were interviewed, you talked about putting your daughter through her education as being something that obviously drives you. What else is it that, you know, spurs you on? Where's that really steely focus that you've got? Where's that come from?
I've tasted failure, you know, and I've come from real humble origins. So failure doesn't really bother me as such. You know, I'm not afraid to fail in one. That's a big, powerful statement. I'm not afraid to fail. And I know that if something really tough did happen, I've got a few people who will unconditionally back me and look after me. But I suppose far more than that, the real thrilling thing that drives me is the feeling of success. That is so much more powerful than the feeling of failure. To me, so therefore back yourself, go for it on a regular basis. And you know, and people talk about the big picture and strategy, but I've got a very simple strategy. And it's the one that my team get driven mad with. A little more, a little faster every day. A little more, a little faster every day. That's what we try, and we can all do that. I've yet to work with anyone who doesn't have the ability to put fire in the belly. The challenge is...
They don't recognise it though, do they? They don't
igniting it is the thing. If you can ignite it, everyone can fly. Everyone can fly. But some people, we've got a society where we've grown cynicism to be part of our culture. And you can see it around all of us every day. It's easier to be negative than it is to be positive. It's easier to be pessimistic than it is to be optimistic. And, you know, if we look at why we're staying in a double dip recession, it's because we're so bloody negative. Surrounded by negative media, surrounded by negative leaders, surrounded by negative noise. If we dare to change that and just make the mood music a little bit more positive, you know, I always say never underestimate what people can achieve in a supportive environment. Never underestimate what they can't achieve in a negative environment. If your boss is pessimistic, inward-looking and negative every day, what chance have you got?
I love the way you talk about recessions being not an act of God. They're man-made. You're so powerful when you say that, and actually I'm glad to agree with you. Generally these things are man-made, whatever they are. How do you work with audiences or even boards, small group of people that recoil from that bit?
You probably notice in the good times, organisations spend a lot of money taking their people away for an off-site. And you'll probably notice in the downturn, they cancel those. And the bit I've realised is that the downturn is even more important to take our people away. But it isn't to stuff them, force feed them, fuel inject them with the corporate strategy. Who gives a toss? Answer, nobody. Nobody remembers the corporate strategy, no matter how many PowerPoint slides you've got, no matter how graphs. Everyone remembers David and Goliath. So managers talk strategy, leaders tell stories. The reason to take your people away is to give them something to believe in. Let them believe that this is more than a business. We're a force for good. You're part of something special. We have a purpose. Don't do the action plans at the end of the day because it's been so expensive to take you away that we need to understand what you're going to do back at the ranch. No, we're going to do that anyway.
I really love you with throwing money at you. So.
It's the fact that we've invested in you. We're taking you away to infuse you with the necessary spirit to endure the next tough 3 months. The holy grail of leadership is to chase that 15 to 20% discretionary effort that we all have. We don't have to give. I can do 9 to 5 and give it my best and go home and not think about it again until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. That's okay. But I think if I look at the really smashing firms, that if I look at a Google, that is my favourite company of the moment, that's doing all the things, they're breaking all the rules, but they give their people things to believe in. So outside their camp it says, don't do evil. Now they actually practice that. And I think they give people something to believe in, that we're part of something. So Virgin is brilliant, Asda does it brilliantly. That we're not just another business. We are a force for good. And you are integral to what we're trying to achieve. And I think also, monologue to your people is old school. I believe that if I look at the perfect model today, how do I galvanise my people? Step number 1, I think, is recognise that 95% of what's said in the boardroom is not secret. Cascade it down. The more I know, the more I believe, the more I'm part of something special, the more you trust me. Engage with me. Second thing, I may say that we have the corporate strategy, but I take it down to my people and I say, what do you think? And if I really mean that question, I've just engaged them. If I listen to what they've got to say, I've connected with them. If I act on what they say, I've inspired them. So why wouldn't you? Yet what we do is we take them away. We start at 7:30 because we want to make the most of their time. Piss everyone off before it starts because you've got to leave home at God knows what time to get there at 7:30. Once you get in, we'll have the first morning is all the corporate executives telling you what they did last year. Who cares? Nobody cares. By lunchtime, we're brain dead. And after lunch, we're going to break you out into breakouts because we need to hit this target of X million pounds and you're going to tell us how we're going to do it. By 5:30, everyone's presented back with a lack of confidence and don't want to be held to account. And the last thing, what actions are you going to sign up to personally in blood to deliver this profit next year? End of away day, thank you very much. And everyone thinks, I'm not coming next year. In fact, I'm leaving the company. Whereas if you look at the great organisations, it's take you away to tell you who we are, what we stand for, where we're trying to get to, how can you help us get there? I say management to me, you can teach it to everyone. You can outsource it, you can train it, and everyone can do it. And it's now being commoditised. I call it hardware. And it's the IQ. We have to think it through, but it's quite a negative experience because management is all about preventing things from going wrong. Leadership is all about ensuring things go right. I call it the EQ, the emotional quotient here. And I call it the software because it's what makes the difference. It's not hardware. You've got to have a bedrock of management, but where you touch the individuals, where you touch the people, it's leadership. Our challenge isn't that we've got the wrong people. I think our challenge is on most of the time we've got the wrong bosses. People don't resign from their organisations, they resign from their bosses. Therefore, what do we need to fix?